Today we have my friend Becky Lucas, and I'm super excited just to hear her story of what God has done in her life. So Becky, thanks for joining us. So I have, over the last year, gotten to know your family a lot more than I ever have. And but I don't know. In fact, we were talking about this just a minute ago. I don't know if I've ever heard your story of like how you came to know Jesus and just the difference that Jesus has made in your life. So I'd love to hear a little about it.
It is a long and crazy story, but I'll get there.
Yeah.
When I grew up, I went to church with my parents. My father taught us a lot about rules and regulations. And I don't know that he'd be real proud to say that, but he wanted to teach us about Jesus. And my mom loved the Lord. And I was really just anxious to escape a lot of what was going on inside our house. They weren't bad parents. They just had their own things to deal with. And I went to college, and the very first day, the very first class at Oral Roberts University, which is where I went, I met my first husband. And he walked in the door, and I just knew right then and there that was the man I was going to marry. Wow. And I don't even know how I knew.
Just knew.
But I just knew, and I wanted to follow God. I didn't really know how to follow God. I knew that some of the things I was being taught was very confusing to me. Over time, my first husband, his name is Stephen, he went through this major deconstruction in his own faith as he went to seminary. And our marriage was a major struggle, and it was full of all kinds of like awful sexual sin and just craziness and abuse that it just, I don't even know how to put words to. And over time, like I had wanted to go to school to become a marriage and family therapist.
Wow.
And I was told that I was going to seminary. I did not want to go to school anymore. I was told I was going to seminary.
Wow.
And I was told by this man that I was called. And I knew from the time I was a teenager that, yeah, God had a plan for me and God had a purpose and God wanted me to do something. And I'd always been kind of called, felt like led towards missions or whatever. Yeah. But I didn't want to go to seminary. And I ended up going to a seminary that did not teach that Jesus is the only way.
Wow.
And I went to classes, and I ended up taking this class. It was all about different ways that people understand Christianity. Like, is Jesus the only way? Are there many paths to God? All kinds of other things. And I remember in the middle of all of the devastation and abuse and the sick way we were living, where even my husband was a pastor, that I was sitting there going, well, we're telling people that there's many paths to God, but there has to be just one way.
Wow.
And I remember one night, he was sitting in the recliner next to me, and I looked at him and I said, this doesn't even make sense. And he said, why? And I tried to explain to him that if the sky is blue, we can't all call it different colors.
Right.
And have the sky still be blue. Truth has to be truth somewhere. There has to be a bottom line.
Sure.
And I didn't know what or where or how.
Right.
But I came to class for an intensive for seminary. This is the funniest thing in the whole wide world to me. And one of the things that was discussed in one of the classes, I took a theology of human sexuality.
Oh, wow.
And that was the class, and in it they discussed domestic violence. And in that class, I realized, oh my gosh, this is the relationship I'm in. I had to get up and just leave when this woman who is a pastor gave her testimony of, this woman who is pastor's wife gave her testimony of how that could happen to her too, and how it happens in the church. And I just got up and walked out. And the professor, she's amazing. She just sat there with me, and she just let me just be. And just gave me that space to process. And that Sunday, I went to church with, I was actually staying that week with some people I went to ORU with, very, very dear friends of mine. And I went to church with them, and it was Baptist church. And I was like, I don't know about this. But I went, and the pastor preached on grace.
Oh, wow.
Let's put this in perspective. I was exhausted.
Right.
I was at the end of my rope.
Sure.
I had 2 small children at the time who were completely depending on me. my husband was a pastor, and he was trying to do a new church start, and there was the intense amount of pressure of 6 figures worth of money being placed on us to get this thing off the ground and do it good.
Right.
And me in my heart knowing this can't be right, and what we're telling people is not okay.
Sure. Wow.
And so at the end of the sermon, at the end of the service, I walked up to the pastor and I said, I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I need to know more.
Right.
And so he said, let's meet this evening. And so I went back to the church at the evening time, and I just poured out my story, all of it, all the gory details, all the things that,
right.
Just I haven't told anybody else except for my husband and God. And at the end, he just told me the gospel all over again.
Wow.
And it's not like I hadn't heard it before.
Sure.
And tears just started going down my face. And he's like, I can tell by the tears that this is what God is wanting to do for you right now. Why don't we just pray?
Wow.
And I did. And totally changed my life, because at that point I realized that there was hope. That the end of my rope wasn't the end of my rope. That there was something to free fall onto, because I had nothing to free fall onto. We had bought a house, we were doing this thing. I had no job outside of what we were doing. I didn't see an end in sight. And so incidentally, the seminary class was not over. So he connected and continued to do some discipleship throughout the week via email and things like that. And the next Sunday, I went back to church with my friends, and the worship was amazing. And I was sitting there praying during that time, and I said, God, I don't want to have anything before you. And he went, oh, really? And when God is like that, that's not very fun. Because God was like, well, nothing? And I went, I don't want to have anything in front of you. And he goes, what if it costs you everything? And I said, sure. And he's like, even your husband and your children. I had to think about that.
Right.
But I came to the conclusion before the end of the invitation that yes, even if it cost me my husband and my children, I would follow Jesus.
Wow.
And I went back home, many states away, and this pastor continued to disciple me, and I went back as a missionary to my own home. And my husband at that time was going through some major mental illness issues, and I literally stopped participating in what we were doing. I reached out to the people who were funding the project, let them know that I was out,
Right.
and that I needed to be for my own sake, my own wellness, etc. He knew that things were not okay in the home. And I started going to church in town. And every Sunday, he threatened to commit suicide. Every Sunday. And every Sunday, I would load the children in the car, and I would call my mom, and I would say, okay, he says if I go to church, he's going to kill himself.
Wow.
And so every Sunday, for a while, I did it. And I continued with a mindset that I was going to be a missionary in my own home. And there was a point at which I kept telling this pastor back in Tulsa, Oklahoma, everything that has gone before in my marriage, I'm going to set it aside. If I have said that I have forgiven him, that means I have forgiven him. I'm going back in as a missionary. And he's like, you don't have to do that. That's what's going on. It's not okay. You don't have to do that. And I'm like, no, I'm going back in. In the course of that, there was a trip where I went to go and see my parents. And on the way, the entire way, the kids were small, they were asleep in the back seat. He kept telling me that if I didn't, that I wasn't allowed to make the decision to follow Jesus this way on my own, that we make every decision together as a couple. And I didn't ask him about it, I didn't talk to him about it, and I was wrong, and that if I didn't change, that he would divorce me. And I remember us arriving. Now, this was a 12-hour trip. and we arrived. He went into the house. My mother took one look at me, and she said to me, "Are you okay?" And I went, "No." And she told my dad, come get the kids and take them in the house. Put them to bed, because it was way late at night. And she said, "Okay, we're going to go." And I went, "Okay." So I drove to the HEB parking lot just several blocks away, and I told her what had happened. And she had said to me, "You said yes to God at the cost of everything. God has not left you. It'll be okay." So I ended up losing that marriage. There was nothing I could do to make it okay. It was too broken. So I'd like to pretend that, you get to say yes to Jesus and everything gets okay.
Right.
It doesn't.
Right.
The children still spend half of their time with their dad, and I had to choose.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was a very real choice for me, And now they're having to make decisions about their dad.
Sure.
On their own, and in relationship to their faith and what they think and what they believe and things like that. And so that was my story. And I, just walked by faith from one miracle to the next, because I didn't know how I was going to pay my bills. I didn't know how I was going to eat. I didn't know anything. Like, I ended up getting a job working in heating and air conditioning. I'd never worked in heating and air conditioning before. I remember one guy, he kept saying, "I'm not getting in the middle of this. I'm not getting in the middle of this. Divorces are messy. I'm not getting in the middle of this." But if I ever needed something, he would come over and teach me how to do it. Like, I needed to hang a shelf. He wouldn't hang the shelf, but he taught me how to hang the shelf.
Right, that's great.
And so, like, one day he came over, and we were gonna drink a beer on the porch and just sit and talk and just be. And he walked in the house, and he brought the beer. And he walked in the house, and he opened up the fridge, and he's like, "Where's the food?" I was like, "There isn't." And he's like, "Why?" I said, "Because the food banks are only open while I work, and if I don't work, I don't get paid, and then I don't pay the bills."
Wow.
And he said, "But why?" I said, "Because I have the mortgage."
Right.
So I was paying the mortgage on $12 an hour
Unbelievable.
on this house, and footing all of the bills for the house and taking care of it. And, it just, and he came to me and he goes, "So I'm taking you to the store." And I said I would never get in the middle of it. And I don't know that I believe in Jesus the way you do.
Wow.
But you need some food. And that was just like one example of how, like, prayers got answered.
Yeah.
If, like, he said, spend $100 on food, get what you need.
Yeah.
And our older two still remember days where we ate lots of rice and potatoes and ramen. I can make rice and potatoes and ramen so many ways, it's not even funny. And there was one night, I don't want to make it sound like it was all depressing. It wasn't. Like, there was one night that we had potatoes, and, like, one of the kids looked at it and was like, "Oh my gosh, potatoes again." And I just started a potato food fight. And that's one of our happiest memories of living there, was that mashed potato food fight.
Yeah.
And so we moved here,
Right.
and I was absolutely against the idea of, like, any kind of relationships or anything whatsoever. And I ended up getting a job working as a meter reader for the power company. And the very first day I was training, my now husband looked at me straight in the face, and he's like, "Why do you want to do this job? This job is not safe for a woman. You shouldn't be here. You shouldn't be doing this." And I was like, "I don't even know you." And so that is literally how it happened.
That's awesome.
And other than our names, we really didn't know very much about each other. He was trying to train me on the job as we went, and I did it. And we would talk, and I told him, "I'm doing this job because I'm a single mom with 2 kids,
Right.
and the hours work perfect so that I can be there when they get off the bus." And that's it.
Yeah.
And, because I finished seminary. I had my master's degree. I could have gone to work for the other jobs, but I wanted to be there for the kids.
Sure.
And so We teased each other some that day. In fact, I was like, how old are you even? And he wouldn't tell me. So I just started calling him Old and Wise. I didn't call him by name. I just called him Old and Wise all day. And finally he told me how old he was. And, but so we just kind of were friends and just hung out. And over time, there was another gal at work. Now my husband had been burned really, really bad in previous marriage situations and things like that. I'll let him tell his own story. But he told this gal at work that we were both kind of friends with that he would be interested in going out on a date with me. And see, I was so against the idea of men even in my space, because men were not safe, men were not okay, men were dangerous, that I wasn't interested. And I was certainly not interested in someone who couldn't come and ask me out themselves. And so my exact response to her was, what is this, 5th grade, that he has to ask you to ask me out for him? Is this 5th grade? And she's like, no, he's been through a lot. Give him a chance. I'm like, no. And she's like, no, give him a chance. Really, he's a really, really good guy. And I was like, okay. And so at that time I had moved to Tulsa, obviously, and I was attending the church where the pastor who had introduced me to Jesus was pastoring. And Jeremy wanted me to, eventually visit where he was going. But before that, I had told him I'll watch a football game with you. I'll watch a football game. So he asked me one time, you want to go watch a football game at Buffalo Wild Wings? And we closed the place down talking and drinking coffee and just having a good time. And so we started dating, and I visited one time when I knew that he wasn't going to be at church. And so I visited that church, and it felt at home. And then, I don't know, it's taken us a while to grow together towards Jesus in a way that is the family life that I envisioned. We had been reading through the Bible together this year. And the more I read about the Old Testament, the more I discovered just how holy God is. God is so stinking holy, and there's no way I can ever come close. And it's so easy to fall into a shame spiral, especially knowing all the places I've been and the things I've done and the ways I've told people the things that are not true are true. The ways I have, the sins that have been committed. And I know that, it's real easy to be like, oh yeah, that's all covered on the cross. It's no big deal. But when you're sitting and reading the Old Testament, people died for their sin.
It's crazy.
And then you read about how holy God is, you're like, dude, I could never measure up. And it occurred to me that God must really want us. God must really, really, really want to be in relationship with us, because if the entire Old Testament, as I've read it so far, and we've just gone through all the way through Judges, is God's people are his people, and then they go away and they completely reject him, and then they come back when life gets hard, and then they reject him again, and then they come back when life gets hard, and they reject him again. And in his holiness, God allows all this. I'm sitting here thinking, this is too much, because I act that way. It may not be that I'm overtly rejecting him today like I did before, but it's okay, so have I been doing the things I need to do to live the way God wants me to, or have I been my thing is I like safety, I like security, I'm like a big mama bear about my kids. Have I really trusted them to Jesus lately? Getting my priorities together. And so that was really kicking my tail, and God was like, dude,
gotta let go.
I died for all that shame thing that you're doing right now. And I was like, so that's it. And it was like a revelation all over again in the middle of the night, last night even, about how the shame has been taken away on the cross for all the things that were. And God's holiness, he still loves me.
That's right.
So that was a really big deal to me last night because I know where I've come from.
Right.
And this July, Jeremy and I will be married 7 years, and now we're reading the Bible together.
Praise God.
And things like that. But it's not been easy.
Yeah.
And I won't pretend that following Jesus solves people's problems. In some ways, it creates more.
Wow.
Because I had to choose.
Yeah.
I had to choose. Am I going to continue living this way and telling people these things when this has been my bread and butter and my livelihood and all of this?
Right.
What if I really lose everything?
Right.
And because that threat was very real at one point.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how I came.
That's tough.
Yeah. That's. I mean, it isn't pretty.
Yeah, and I love this. I love that about your story, where it's kind of like this, a combination of maybe not seeing as clear in the past of like he's pursuing me, but now you can see he's like all those steps where he's running after you, right?
Yeah.
And then where you're like saying in your story, it's like, Jesus, you're worth it. Like, and maybe in the beginning it was like, I can barely see that he's worth it, and now you're like, he really is worth it. It's really cool. I love hearing that in your story. So just real fast here, if you were just sharing with anybody who's maybe going through a similar struggle that you've gone through, what encouragement would you give them? Like, they got to be they're watching this and they're like, maybe they're just kicking the tires on Jesus and God. What would you encourage? What would your encouragement be to them as they're thinking through those things?
We live in a society that says you have to know now. You have to have an answer now. You have to have the money now. You have to have the safety now. You have to have the security now. You have to have all the things now. And you have to know it now. And you have to have all of your ducks in a row in order for it to be okay. And sometimes you have to drop the plate and let it completely shatter. And trust that when you free fall onto God's grace, there is a way to build it back up again.
Wow.
And God will do that over time, and it may not seem like it. Like, we pursued full custody of the 2 older children. That did not happen.
Right.
God promised me his justice, though.
Right.
And so we share joint custody. And in the beginning, I was like, this is not right. And it's turned out that how it's happened is exactly how it's needed to happen.
Right.
Sometimes the outcomes of what we believe God has promised us may not seem to be the thing.
Yeah.
And unless we let things unless we allow things to get broken, we can't hold it together.
Yeah. 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 It's almost like that scenario of where, like, when you're stuck in the middle of it and you want, like, I find that in my life. I want you to do these things. And then I can get back from it just a little bit. I'm like, oh, okay. I see. If I just let go and I'll trust you, I can see what he's doing. And so, yeah.
The other thing to know, though, is it's not just allowing God to allow things to completely fall apart. It's knowing that when we walk off that cliff, and a lot of times it really feels like it, and we're free falling, there is God's grace to catch us.
That's it.
And I mean, we ate on miracles. I paid bills on miracles.
On grace.
Yes,
Right.
on grace. Grace
Yeah.
literally kept us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so even though it seemed like everything was coming apart, it wasn't.
No, because there's an author that I read, and you said it a couple of times, like the end of my rope. He says, I know God's address. It's at the end of your rope. Like, that's where God's trying to get us to. And in the middle of it's like, no. But like, when I look at you now and I see like your faith, your steadfastness, watching you and Jeremy raise your kids through an imperfect, scenario. But it's like you found like that center, and it's really beautiful. Well, I'm so thankful for you sharing. And so I know your story is going to be super encouraging to lots of people. So thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Becky, again, for sharing your story with us. It's super encouraging.